Hi, my name is Scott Kinnicky. I am the founder of Neuro-Empathic Counseling here at Lake Ozark. I'm also an integral neurotherapist, a mental health counselor, and a health coach. A little bit about me, my background. I come from St. Louis originally. There I was working in a clinic for neurofeedback, QEEG brain evaluations, and biofeedback, things like heart rate variability. We'll talk more about that later. I was there for about seven and a half years, just learning from a practitioner in the area, learning how to implement neurofeedback, do QEEG evaluations, and heart rate variability biofeedback. I went for my master's in mental health counseling at that time, and I ended up in the St. Louis Family Court Systems in the detention center for about a year. And that was a very difficult job for me, primarily because I'm a very empathic person, and the detention center is a very punitive system. So kind of being empathic and being in a punitive system was very painful, and there was a lot of suffering there. So I decided to get out of that, and I went into a residential facility for complex developmental trauma, and that facility didn't have a lot of neurofeedback in their kind of milieu. So I spent about 7.5 years developing a very robust and highly advanced neurofeedback program and department. We had over 7 employees. We were servicing over 130 kids at any given time. And that's where I learned a lot about trauma. And I learned about how to leverage relationship and also empathy and also therapy into the neurofeedback dynamic for greater and greater success. So recently I've resigned from that position, and so now I'm just in a full-time private practice here at Lake Ozark, up in Jeff City, and then eventually we'll probably go up into Columbia, Missouri. But here what we do is we offer neurofeedback services, we offer biofeedback services, mental health counseling, and then we also do some work with remote neurotherapy. So if you're interested, say you're in a more remote area, we can offer you remote neurotherapy services. Now, neurotherapy primarily interacts with regulating the nervous system, bringing the nervous system into more efficiency and balance. And when that happens, typically symptoms like anxiety and depression and attention deficit, ADHD, insomnia, these types of symptoms regulate, and the nervous system begins to kind of let those go, let those symptoms go. So let's talk about neurofeedback. So what is neurofeedback? Now, before we get into neurofeedback, let's talk a little bit about what quantitative electroencephalograph is, QEEG. What QEEG is essentially so the way that it kind of spells out is quantitative means multiple different points, electro means electricity, encephala means brain, and graph means picture. So it's really just an electric brain picture. Now, what that translates to is a brain map. So a brain map is essentially, it's a normative database that we record, and then we compare to this normative database to see if there is any differentiation, if there is any difference between your brain and a bunch of your peers. Now, what happens is that when we start to see differences compared to a bunch of your peers, we can start to make some hypothesis about where your particular concerns and symptoms are coming from. So if you have a specific concern, let's say you want to improve your attention, and so we can look at the QEEG and we can go, okay, well, the reason that it's difficult for you to focus is because this particular area of the brain is distracted, or it's not activated, or it's underactivated. And so we use that information to develop our neurofeedback protocols. Okay, so what is neurotherapy then? So we know what the QEEG is now. We know that that's a brain map. So how do we do neurotherapy? So neurotherapy is a very simple process, and it uses the QEEG to determine, okay, where are we seeing elevations? Where are we seeing deficits? So going back to that example earlier about attention. So let's say that you have some attention problems. It's hard for you to pay attention when you really want to pay attention. And so if we look at the brain and we see that there is a lot of slow wave in the frontal regions here, in the frontal part of the head, if there's a bunch of slow wave, let's just say underactivation of the frontal lobes. And the frontal lobes really, their function is really about prioritization and decision making and impulse control. So as you're sitting there and you're paying attention to like a podcast, or you're paying attention to a teacher or something, and that kind of thought comes into your mind as to say, hey, listen, maybe it'd be more interesting to go pay attention to that person over there, or maybe pull out your phone, or, let's daydream about something that's really exciting. What tends to happen is that the frontal lobe goes, hey, you're in the middle of a teaching experience right now. You should pay attention to the teacher and not think about this random thing or daydream or something like that. Now, when we have a lot of slow wave in that particular region, what happens is that it's difficult for us to come to that conclusion that we need to refocus our attention. So when we look at the QEEG, we can determine, okay, yeah, we're seeing some slowing of the frontal regions. That's going to impact attention. We would expect that attention is difficult. So what we do is we put sensors on the frontal region here, maybe like right here or right there, or maybe right here or right here. And then we would measure in real time the electrical output, the voltage or the microvolts of that particular frequency or that particular area of the brain. So to give you a little bit more clear example, let's say we know that the person is producing 20 microvolts. Again, we're talking about electricity here. So power, same amount of energy that's coming out of your electric socket. We're seeing that coming out of the brain. If we're seeing 20 microvolts of slow wave coming out of the frontal lobes, we know that that's going to impact attention. So what we also know is that around 10 microvolts is going to be a really good amount of energy that's going to help you to stay focused and concentrated. So what we're going to do is, we're going to measure that electrical output in real time. So as it goes up to 20 microvolts, what we're going to do is we're going to condition that. And then when it goes down into 10 microvolts, or maybe even it just goes down to 18 microvolts, we're going to condition that. And how do you condition that? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to attach some type of feedback to that. So as your brain starts to get very inattentive, you start getting distracted, and that slow wave starts to go up to 20 microvolts, all of the feedback's going to stop. So let's say you're watching a video or something, and that video gets, it just stops playing. Then as your brain starts to produce 18 microvolts or 15 microvolts, that video starts to play again. Now we also may put some music to it or some bell tones. So then as your brain starts to kind of decrease that slow wave and you start to focus your brain, then what's going to happen is you're going to hear some bell tones in the background. So essentially what it is it's operantly conditioning the nervous system. Now we're talking about, if you guys know the history here, we're talking about Skinner. We're not talking about Pavlov. So Pavlov is going to be more about classical conditioning. What we're doing is we're doing what's called operant conditioning. So we're trying to condition certain skills and certain behaviors from being replicated. Okay, so that's neurotherapy in a nutshell. Okay, so what does a neurofeedback session really look like? So the first session is that QEEG recording. So really that QEEG recording is going to be the foundation for how we set all the protocols and the treatment plan. So first session, you come in, you sit down, it's usually about an hour and a half. We just do a QEEG, quantitative electroencephalograph, brain map. We record your EEG, and then you leave. I analyze that data, and then you come back the next time and we go over all that information. So we'll talk about, okay, what did your brain show? What's going on with it? Are there things that you know? Are there things that you don't know? How is it communicating with itself? What does it look like related to, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere? We're going to give you a whole bunch of information about your nervous system. Now, the third session is really going to be about the training. So that's going to be your first neurofeedback session. Now, typically you're going to do about 20 to 30 neurofeedback sessions, depending on kind of your nervous system's receptivity to it. And so the neurofeedback sessions themselves are going to be pretty simple. It's going to be kind of like you're coming in and you're exercising the brain. We're going to watch some shows, we're going to watch some videos, we're going to watch maybe some meditation kind of videos, you're going to listen to some music, there's going to be a lot of bell tones, and then all of those particular media are going to be connected to feedback. So you'll sit for about 30 to 45 minutes, train the brain, and then you'll be done and you go home. And you can do that. Typically, what I recommend is people do it about 2 times a session when they first start. So maybe for the first month, it's twice a week. And then they slowly start to titrate off and do it once a week. That's going to be the quickest and most efficient, because neurofeedback really works based on something called neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is the idea of what fires together wires together. So that the more that the brain can get into a particular place, it can exercise a particular function or perspective, the more that the nervous system is going to begin to create hardware around that to support that functionality. So the more that you do it for periods of time, the more that the nervous system is going to pick up on it and then support it. So it's kind of like going to the gym and lifting weights, or going and doing your cardio. So the neurofeedback sessions are pretty simple. Sometimes if people need to kind of talk a little bit about some stuff, that's okay too. But most of the time it's just going to be training, and it's going to be pretty simple, and it's going to be pretty easy. The last thing I want to talk about is something called heart rate variability, HRV for short, or heart training. Heart rate variability is it's a very powerful modality that we use here at Neuro-Empathic. And heart rate variability is about training the heart to beat in a very specific way. Now, what we know about the heart is that there's something called a baroreflex. It's kind of like a small brain. It's kind of a nervous system next to the heart. And what it does is it monitors your heart rate variability, or so the kind of the change in your heart rate pattern. So our hearts actually increase and decrease in speed every second. You know, when we get our beats per minute and we're kind of putting your hand on your neck there, we're just getting an average. But the reality is that your heartbeat increases and decreases in speed every second. So what heart rate variability is doing is it's measuring that change. So we know that baroreflex monitors that change, and when the heart rate shifts into different patterns, that baroreflex will send messages to the brain to release certain neurochemicals. So if we have an erratic pattern, the baroreflex will send a message to the brain that says, all right, we need to release adrenaline. We need to manage and deal with this threat. Or if the heart rate is very calm and very relaxed and very what we call coherent, that baroreflex will send a message to the brain to say, okay, release endorphins, release calming, kind of more neurotransmitters that are going to make me feel good and better about life. So what heart rate variability is doing is it's essentially a technique where we can confirm and validate that you're actually breathing in a specific pattern that allows the heart rate to get into a particular coherent state, which then sends a message to the brain to release those modulating chemicals that make you feel better and feel good about life. Now, really what happens there is the benefit is that's going to impact anxiety, performance anxiety. It's going to impact depression. It's going to impact sleep. It's going to impact any of those types of things that really get you activated. It's very useful for if you find yourself in a stressful situation to be able to self-regulate and to use heart rate variability to make yourself feel better. It's overall just a wonderfully powerful tool to help your nervous system to be more calm and efficient in the world. Okay, thank you.